The wind came down off the bluffs like a knife, slicing through the cottonwoods and scattering the ash from the morning fire she'd barely kept lit. She curled tighter under the canvas scrap she used for a blanket, a waxy sheet too stiff to fold proper and too thin to hold warmth. Her name was Jo, though she hadn't said it aloud in weeks, maybe months. She said nothing at all these days. Not to the coyotes, not to the bones in her pocket, not even to the God who might have been listening. Her voice had dried up the same way her body had, slow and silent, with a finality that didn't require ceremony. Her left leg ended above the knee. The stump ached in cold. The wooden crutch she'd carved herself was cracked from a fall last week, and she'd used the last of her sinew trying to bind it. Now she leaned on it like a drunk leans on a lie, half aware it would break again, just not sure when. The canyon was cruel terrain for a body like hers, but she'd made it further than anyone said she could. That counted for something. Not enough to fill her belly, but enough to keep her moving. The girl was 19, though time had gone blurry. The bones of her face had come in sharp since she'd fled the last place that tried to keep her. She walked out of that asylum with blood still wet on her dress and a broken leg that never healed right. She taught herself to walk again, dragging through the cheatgrass and rattler country, favoring her good leg until it too screamed every step. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The last squirrel she'd snared was so thin it tasted like rope and sand. Snow came early this year, and she hadn't made it to the rail towns where the trash bins overflowed and the brothels tossed scraps to dogs. She tried not to think about meat, or warmth, or the taste of cornmeal mush with salt. She let hunger become a thing outside of her, a shape that followed her like a shadow and curled up beside her when she slept. When the storm rolled in, she knew it was the killing kind. No windbreak, no firewood, no coat thick enough to hold back the wet that iced over everything it touched. She sat under a fallen log and let her breath fog and fade, fingers tucked beneath her armpits, jaw locked so she wouldn't scream. No one was listening anyway. The horse came first, a big bay gelding, wide-chested and steaming, breath pluming out its nose like a train. It stopped at the edge of her camp, if a pile of frozen pine needles and a half-dead girl could be called that, and sniffed the air. She didn't move, couldn't. The man dismounted slow, boots crunching snow, rifle slung across his back, oilskin slick with ice. He stared at her for a long time. "You gonna die out here?" he asked. She squinted up at him, too far gone for words. He looked like a story someone made up, face carved from stone, eyes a mean shade of pale green, a scar through one brow like a lash mark. She didn't answer. She hadn't spoken in so long she was afraid her voice might come out wrong or not at all. He didn't wait for permission. He wrapped her in his coat, lifted her like a bundle of sticks, and laid her across his saddle like a sack of grain. Her head knocked against the leather, but she didn't complain. He tied the crutch to his saddle horn and mounted behind her, one arm around her chest to hold her steady. They rode for hours or days. Her mind drifted in and out of fog. Snow blurred the edges of the world. When she finally felt heat again, real heat, dry and thick like a hearth fire, it made her weep without sound. The man carried her into a low-roofed cabin built against a bluff wall, its timbers black with age and soot. He laid her on a cot near the stove and began stripping off her wet things with the gentleness of someone who'd done this before. Her skin burned as it thawed. He wrapped her in wool and tucked a blanket tight over her shoulders. "You're safe," he said. "Name's Wit. You're on Wit's land now. That mean anything to you?" She didn't answer. She couldn't stop shaking. He brought broth, steaming and thick, and held the tin cup to her lips. She drank in tiny sips, afraid it might vanish like a dream. It filled her chest like light. When she coughed, he wiped her mouth with a rag and waited for her to settle. "You're lucky," he said. "Storm like that would have split your bones from your hide." She nodded, barely. Her voice, raw and small, came after a long silence. "Wasn't luck." Wit raised a brow. "No. Luck ran out 2 winters ago." He didn't press, just nodded once and took her crutch from the saddle hook, examining the fracture in the wood. "We'll fix this," he said. "I got proper tools." Then he paused, looked her square in the eye. "You stay till spring," he said. "That leg of yours won't take much more, and I won't bury a girl who made it this far." Joe didn't answer, but she stayed. That night she dreamed of wolves. In the dream, they circled her in a churchyard, faces not quite animal, not quite man. One of them wore her father's boots. Another smiled with the teeth of the orderly who tried to take what wasn't his. When she tried to run, her crutch cracked. She fell. They closed in. She woke to a fire and the smell of coffee. Her fingers were warm. For the first time in a long while, she didn't want to die. But wanting wasn't enough, not yet. There was work to do. And vengeance is patient. The days bled slow after the storm. The cabin was rough-built but dry, with a stone hearth that cracked and hissed when Wit tossed in green wood. Joe slept for 2 days straight, waking only to eat broth or piss in a bucket Wit set by the cot. Her muscles twitched beneath the wool, like they were learning how to belong in a warm body again. Her mind stayed quiet. Not empty, no, never that, but quiet in a way she hadn't known since the night she lost her leg. When she finally stood, the crutch Wit made for her was straighter than the last and stronger by far. He'd carved it from hickory, smoothed the grip, even wrapped the top in leather where it met her underarm. She didn't thank him. Words still came hard, and she didn't owe him softness. Not yet. He watched her test it by the stove, arms crossed, brow low over his eyes. "Legs stiff," he said. She gave a single nod. Stiff was generous. It felt like a dead weight sewn to her hip. "I'll show you the outbuildings when you're ready," he said. "We run stock, but not much this season. Wolves took 2 calves and my temper." She didn't ask what he meant by we. The next morning she found the barn. It sat low in the valley, sunk into the rise where the snow didn't drift so deep. Inside, it smelled of old straw and iron and the kind of dust that lives in rope fibers. Joe ran her fingers along the saddle horns hung on the wall, counted bridle bits, and watched the mare in the far stall kick at a loose board. She wasn't afraid of horses. She'd grown up under their bellies and between their legs, mucking stalls and combing burrs out of their manes with a spoon when her mother was too drunk to hold a brush. Her father died under a spooked gelding, but Joe had never blamed the animal. Men brought their own curses. Wit gave her chores without ceremony. Feed the hens, check the traps on the lower ridge, oil the gate hinges before the next freeze. He didn't coddle, and he didn't ask what she'd done to end up in a snow pit with 1 leg and no family name. For that, she respected him. She kept her story locked up, each piece held behind her teeth like a secret map. There were names she hadn't said in years: Morgan Tallow, Ephraim Bowl, Sisters Briggs and Allen from the St. Charity Home for the Incurable, Sheriff Meeks, who'd laughed when she crawled into town dripping blood and begged for justice. Every one of them walked with their heads high still, somewhere out west, never dreaming the girl they'd broken was upright again, wearing wool and cutting wood like her heart still beat. But the fire in her hadn't gone out. It had just burned quiet, like a coal under ash. By the second week, her strength returned. Her shoulders filled out from hauling buckets. Her cheeks colored. She never smiled, but her jaw loosened, and she started whistling to the mule when it refused to move. She moved through the world the way a coyote does after a trap, wary, scarred, but meaner than before. One morning, Wit took her hunting, not because she asked, because he knew she was ready. They climbed the eastern ridge where elk scraped the bark off saplings and left scat like knuckle bones. Wit gave her a rifle, short-barreled, lever-action, with a cherry wood stock. "You shot before?" he asked. She chambered a round without answering, took a knee and aimed downhill where a hare flinched in the brush. The crack echoed off stone. The hare flopped once, then went still. Wit didn't smile, but he gave a short nod. They dressed the animal there, steam curling off blood-warm flesh. Joe handled the knife with calm precision, her movements practiced, almost surgical. Wit watched her, then glanced at the stump where her leg ended beneath her skirt. "Pain bad?" he asked. She didn't look up. It ain't new. He didn't press. Later, by the fire, he told her about the war. Not which one, just that he was in it, and it changed him. He said that like it was supposed to explain everything, the cabin, the silence, the way he moved like he expected the world to strike first. "You run from something?" he asked, not looking at her. Joe didn't lie, not anymore. That was the closest she came to truth. By midwinter, they'd fallen into rhythm. Joe tended the traps. Wit hunted bigger game. They moved around each other with the ease of two creatures that understood how to survive, scarred but still breathing. She found a book in the cabin one evening, pages yellowed and soft at the edges, psalms and lamentations. She stared at the passages long into the night, not reading them for prayer, but for pattern, for rhythm, for the way pain could be made into song. She started carving. It began with small things, a bone-handled comb, a hairpin shaped like a fox. Then came the longer nights, and with them a totem. She whittled it from aspen, long and thin, the shape of a man kneeling, mouth open in scream. It had no face, just the idea of one. She didn't show it to Wit. One night she woke to barking. The mule screamed once, high and long, before silence returned. Joe grabbed her crutch and limped to the window. The snow was red. Wit came back dragging two coyotes tied by the paws. His shoulder was bleeding, but his face was calm. "Testing fences," he said. Joe didn't ask whose blood stained his knife. She cleaned the wound without flinching. He didn't make a sound. Spring would come soon. The days were longer. The wind shifted, no longer bitter but impatient. Wit started riding out more. Joe stayed behind. She found the ledger on a high shelf one morning, behind a sack of old tobacco. It was bound in rawhide, stitched with thick twine. The pages were full of names and dates, sales, purchases. One line made her heart drop low into her gut. October 11 received girl from Meeks, broken leg, quiet, useful. The pen scratched Wit's name beside it. Joe sat down hard on the cot. Her hands went cold. The room swam. He knew. He'd known her from the beginning. The fire flickered. Outside, a hawk screamed. She closed the ledger and laid it back on the shelf, face down. Then she packed the satchel she'd kept under the bed with rope, a knife, and flint. She didn't leave. Not yet. She needed answers. And revenge don't come quick. It waits like her. She watched the door. Waited for him to return. He'd brought her in from the cold. But he wasn't her savior. He was the next name on the list. Wit returned at dusk, spurs silent in the new mud. Spring hadn't bloomed yet, but the ground was softening, loosing the frost it had held so long. He smelled of sweat and pine sap, a fresh kill slung over the horse's haunches. When he entered, Joe was slicing turnips. Her face was calm. Her hands moved like a clock, steady and without hesitation. He set the haunch on the butcher's block and took a moment to shake off his coat. "You kept the fire going," he said. "I ain't cold." He paused. That was the first time she'd spoken to him all day. She ladled stew into the tin pot, handed it over without meeting his eye. He took it, nodding thanks, and sat near the stove. The firelight moved across his face in slow pulses, showing new lines that hadn't been there weeks ago. Joe ate at the counter. Her crutch leaned nearby, one hand never far from the blade tucked at her side. After supper, Wit smoked a pipe. He stared out the window where the sun bled over the ridge. The land looked peaceful, but Joe saw the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't at ease. Something out there gnawed at him. "Going somewhere?" she asked, voice low. Wit turned toward her. North fences down. Got to patch it before the herd scatters. Long ride. He nodded. I'll be gone 2 days. She met his gaze for the first time in weeks. You trust me here. If I didn't, I wouldn't leave. That night when he slept, she moved quiet, not sneaking, just careful. She walked the house as if it were her own, opened drawers, lifted floorboards, tapped walls for hollows. In the cellar, behind crates of dried apples, she found the box. It was locked, but the hinge was old. She snapped it with the heel of her boot and pried the lid. Inside, letters, photographs, a half-burned badge. Sheriff Meeks, Ephraim Bowl, Tallow's seal. The paper smelled of dust and guilt. One letter in particular was folded and refolded so many times the edges were thin as onion skin. It read, "Girl's not right in the head, screams at nothing. Don't pay her no mind, just keep her quiet, keep her out of sight. You'll be compensated come harvest." Witt's signature followed, neat, controlled. Joe's mouth went dry. They sold her like an animal, passed her from hand to hand like she was no more than a burden to be hidden, bruised, and forgotten. She replaced the papers with care. The next morning, Witt rode out before dawn. He didn't kiss her cheek or wish her safety. He rode like a man who expected to return and find nothing changed. She waited 2 hours after he vanished, then saddled the mule. She packed the ledger, the letters, a sack of dried meat, her blade, and the fox hairpin she'd carved. And she rode, not away, but down into the basin where the towns sat like rot between the hills. Joe didn't want to run, not anymore. She was done hiding. She was hunting now. The town of Denton had grown mean since she last saw it. The rail brought money, and money brought men with rough hands and cold eyes. The saloon was bigger, the church smaller, but Meek still wore his badge, still strutted with a belly full of beer and pride. She watched him from the alley across the street. He didn't recognize her. The crutch had thrown him, the hair cut short now, the face leaner. The girl he remembered had screamed when the nurse held her down and the saw came for her leg. The girl who sobbed and begged and pissed herself. That girl was dead. She walked into the jail at sunset, rifle slung across her back, blade in her belt. Meeks looked up from his chair and blinked. "Well now," he said, sitting up straighter. "Ain't seen you before. Lost, miss." Joe shut the door behind her, locked it. His hand drifted to his pistol. She let it. "I was a girl once," she said, voice like iron. He squinted. She limped forward. "You told them to keep me quiet, called me broken, sold me off like cattle." Recognition flickered in his eyes, then panic. He stood, hand going for the gun. She raised the rifle, shot him in the knee. He went down screaming. "You remember now." He clutched his leg, blood pouring between his fingers. You're her," he gasped. "The girl from St. Charity, Joe. I buried that name." She stepped closer, pressing the muzzle to his temple. "Give me the names," she said. He whimpered. "Names," she repeated. "Every man who paid, everyone you handed girls to." He tried to bargain, pleaded. She listened, wrote the names down. 7 in total. Then she knocked him out cold, tied him to his desk, and lit the ledger afire. She walked out as the flames licked up the walls. No one stopped her. No one saw her. She vanished into the hills again, headed west toward the last name on the list, Ephraim Bowl. The next days were hard. No roof, little food. The mule died in a flash flood, and she had to crawl 10 miles on foot before a trapper gave her ride. She reached the Bowl estate near dusk, its white columns rising like fangs above the canyon mouth. Oil lamps burned behind tall windows. Rich men liked to live far from town, where the law couldn't hear screaming. She watched the house for 2 days, counted every guard, every dog. Then she climbed the cliff behind it, dragging herself up by roots and shale, every inch burning. At midnight, she found the boy. He was maybe 8, thin as a rail, chained to a cot in the stone shed. His wrists were raw. He didn't speak when she freed him, just stared with wide, hollow eyes. Joe wrapped him in her coat, held his hand. He followed her without a sound. She set the fire after they left, poured lamp oil over every room, every bed, every ledger. Bowl never made it out. The boy never looked back. She took him east, toward Witt's land, toward the cabin she once hated. It would be spring now. Witt would be waiting. And she had questions, hard ones. But first she needed to know, was he her jailer? Or something worse? Either way, she'd face him. Not as a broken girl, but as a reckoning. They crossed the last ridge as the moon sank behind the pines. The boy was sleeping on her back, arms hooked around her neck, breath warm against her skin. His silence unsettled her. It was the kind of quiet bred by cruelty, a quiet born not from peace, but from being taught that sound invited pain. Joe's leg throbbed with each step. She wrapped the stump tight, packed it with moss and ash to keep infection down, but the skin was angry and hot. Every 100 yards she had to rest, but she didn't stop, couldn't. The fire inside her was burning through the pain, through the hunger, through the doubt. There was only forward now. Witt's cabin came into view by morning. Smoke curled from the chimney. The fence she'd helped mend was still standing. Chickens clucked in the yard. It looked the same. As she was. Joe set the boy down at the edge of the trees. "Stay here," she said. "Don't come till I call." He didn't speak, just nodded once, sharp and small. She limped into the clearing, rifle slung across her back. The chickens scattered. The door opened before she reached it. Witt stepped out. He wore his gun low, but his hands were empty. His face didn't show surprise, just a hard kind of weariness, like he'd been waiting for her since the moment she left. "You found it," he said. "I found more than that." She stopped 10 paces from him, close enough to smell the coffee still on his breath. "I read your letters, the ones you didn't burn." Witt didn't flinch. "I was a broker," he said. "That's what we called it, before the war. After the war, didn't matter. We moved people, girls, boys, anything could be bought, anything could be disappeared." "You signed my name." "I did. Then why save me?" He looked past her, toward the trees. Thought maybe one thing could be different, one thing done right. She barked a laugh. It hurt to laugh. "You think this makes it right?" He met her gaze. For once, no lie behind his eyes. "No." She stepped closer. "You gave me to Meeks." "I did. You called me broken. I believed it." She raised the rifle. He didn't move. "I didn't know what they did to you at St. Charity," he said. "Didn't ask. That was the sin. I knew what kind of place it was, and I didn't ask." Joe's hands trembled. "I came here to kill you." "I know." He looked down at her leg. "I figured you might shoot me in the same one." "You think this is justice?" "No, but it's yours." She stared at him. For a moment the mountain was silent. The wind paused, the trees listened. Then she lowered the rifle. Justice is keeping what I lost, she said, and making sure you live with what you did. His eyes flickered like he hadn't expected mercy. She stepped back, whistled once, sharp and short. The boy stepped out of the trees. Whit looked at him, then at her. What's his name? He don't speak. Whit nodded. They stood there, three shadows in the rising sun. Joe turned. You owe us a roof, she said, and work. He watched her go. She didn't look back. Inside, she laid the boy on the cot where she'd once near died, washed his feet, wrapped his wrists. She fed him boiled grain and spoke nothing. That night she stood by the fire, carving again. Not totems this time. She carved names, one for each man who hurt her, one for each girl she never saw again. Small pieces of wood buried under the floorboards, a graveyard of memory. The boy watched her. She gave him a piece of pine. Carve something, she said. He hesitated, then began to scrape. Whit slept in the barn now, his choice. He cooked, he fetched water, he never asked forgiveness. And Joe never gave it. But she let him live. Because vengeance wasn't always killing. Sometimes it was letting a man wake each day knowing he'd built his own gallows and no one planned to hang him. Sometimes it was a woman living free with a boy who'd never be sold again. Spring came hard, the snows melted slow, but the cabin held. Joe walked the ridges, trapped rabbits, planted onion. She taught the boy to aim, to track, to sharpen his blade by feel. And at night she carved. Not for rage. Not anymore. But to remember. The summer came dry and early. The wind carried dust more often than rain, and Joe learned to stretch water longer than she thought possible. The boy who one day tapped his own chest and said "Cal" had grown darker from the sun, stronger in his limbs, quieter in his steps. She taught him how to gut fish with a nail, how to patch a shirt with horsehair, how to walk without leaving a trail. Cal never asked about her leg. He saw it, saw how she moved, how sometimes the stump bled when she pushed too far, but he never questioned it. Just brought her fresh bandages when she winced or fetched her crutch without being told. Their silence became language. Their routine became law. Whit never stepped back into the cabin. He kept to the barn, slept in hay or under the stars, worked sunup to dark. His beard grayed that summer, as if the past was catching up to his bones faster than time alone ever could. He didn't look her in the eye much. When he did, there was something hollow in him, something she recognized. Not regret, that was too easy. Recognition, the slow, soul-cutting knowledge that a man had helped build the thing that nearly destroyed a child. That the hands that fixed fences and stirred stew had once signed papers that sentenced the innocent to the cold. Joe could have left, could have packed up with Cal and vanished into the southern cliffs, taken a new name, a new place. But she didn't. Not because of Whit. Because the land was hers now. The cabin had become a place that held her story, not just the wound, but the fire after. A boy who trusted her, a rifle above the door, a box of names buried beneath the hearth. And there was one last thing to be done. That fall, word reached the basin by way of a tinker. Morgan Tallow had returned west. Richer than ever, his face lean and powdered, his teeth shined like silver. He owned a mine now, east of the Split Rock Range, with men guarding his gates and girls washing his laundry. They said he walked with a limp from a mule kick during some border skirmish. Said he feared no law. Joe spent one day listening, the next preparing. She oiled her rifle, packed dried meat, kissed Cal's head while he slept. Whit stood at the corral as she saddled the mule. You going for him? Yes. You think you'll come back? If I don't, she said, You keep him safe." Whit nodded, "I will." She paused, looked at him hard. "You still got blood on your hands, but you're trying." "I am." "Then make it mean something." She rode out before the frost set in. Split Rock was 3 days east by trail, but she didn't use trails. She cut through draws, across riverbeds, past burned-out cabins and forgotten bones, slept under stars, woke to coyote song. Her legs screamed every mile, but she didn't slow. When she reached the mine, it was dusk. The sky bled red across the ridge. Smoke curled from the stackhouse. Guards played cards by the gate, rifles leaning against the wall. She didn't come through the front. She climbed the wash behind the stables, belly down in scrub, her blade in her teeth. She waited until the moon rose, then slipped into the bunkhouse and found the youngest cook boy. "I need 5 minutes with Morgan Tallow," she said. "I can't, he's—" She handed him a silver ring, the last thing she owned from her mother. "5 minutes," she said again. He ran. 20 minutes passed. She waited by the stables, eyes scanning shadow. Then the door opened. Tallow stepped out, older than she remembered, but still vain, his hair slicked, his limp faint. He didn't recognize her. "Girl," he said, "if this is about wages, you'll have to speak with." Joe lifted her rifle. He froze. "Don't remember me?" she asked. His mouth opened, closed, then twitched. "Saint Charity," she said. Still no words. "I screamed for help," she said. "You told the nurse to sew my mouth shut." Recognition came slow, like ice cracking. "You're dead," he whispered. "No," she said. "I lived. You made me what I am." "Please," he started. "I didn't." She shot him in the foot. He collapsed, shrieking. The guards ran at the sound. She dropped one with a second shot. The rest fell back, panicked by her calm. She walked to where Tallow crawled, blood trailing. "You don't get a name on a grave," she said, "just ash." Then she struck the match and dropped it on the oil she'd spilled. The bunkhouse roared. She left him screaming. The mine burned for 3 days. Joe returned home with smoke in her clothes and a new scar along her jaw. Cal ran to her, arms out. He didn't ask where she'd been. He just held on. Whit handed her coffee and didn't say a word. That winter, snow fell heavier than ever before. They kept warm by splitting logs and boiling roots. Cal learned to read. Joe let herself smile, just once, when he sounded out justice from an old book of sermons. At night, she stood at the window and watched the stars move. She still carried the pain, still woke some nights with her jaw clenched, fists tight. But the cold no longer claimed her. She had a boy, a fire, a name she'd earned back with blood. And that was enough. Joe never told Cal the full story. But one day, when he was older, he found a carving buried under the floor. A small figure, faceless, kneeling. He asked her what it meant. She looked at him for a long time. Then said, "It means we survived." And they did.